The road to Blackwater Lake was nearly abandoned, hidden between miles of forest where the trees leaned in on both sides, as if whispering secrets to each other. Hannah drove with both hands tight on the wheel, her eyes flicking from the cracked asphalt ahead to the faded GPS screen on her phone. The signal had dropped 20 minutes ago, and now she relied on memory, on half-remembered directions from her late grandmother's journal. A journal that spoke of a cabin, a lake, and a history no one in her family ever talked about. The sky above was painted in gray smudges, storm clouds rolling slowly as if following her. The car's radio had been nothing but static since she entered the woods, and every now and then she thought she could hear something inside the static, like a faint hum, almost a voice, but too brief to catch. She turned the dial quickly, muttering under her breath, but nothing cleared the sound. Finally, the forest broke open, revealing Blackwater Lake. Its waters stretched wide, black as ink, reflecting the stormy sky in a glassy, unnatural stillness. There were no boats, no movement, no ripples from fish beneath the surface. It looked less like water and more like a mirror swallowing the world. Hannah parked near the edge, dust rising around the tires. She stepped out, her boots crunching the gravel, and pulled her coat tighter. The air smelled sharp, like metal and rain, and underneath it, faintly, the sour smell of rot. She paused, glancing at the tree line, at the shadows shifting where the woods met the lake. The cabin wasn't hard to find. It stood on a rise overlooking the lake, a crooked structure made of weathered wood that sagged with time. The porch creaked as she stepped on it, her breath clouding in the chill. She remembered the words from her grandmother's journal, "Never go near the water at night. Never listen when it calls." Her grandmother had been a quiet woman, rarely speaking of her youth. She died whispering about this lake, about voices that came from below, about something that never left once it found you. The family dismissed her as delusional in her old age, but Hannah had always felt something more, an unfinished story buried in silence. That's why she was here. She unlocked the cabin with the rusty key mailed to her after the funeral. Inside, the smell of dust and mildew hit her instantly. The furniture was draped in white sheets, outlines of chairs and tables looming like ghosts. On the mantel above the cold fireplace lay photographs, black and white, yellowing at the edges. Family members she didn't recognize, their faces solemn, eyes almost too dark for the old photographs. But one picture made her throat tighten, her grandmother, much younger, standing on the porch of this very cabin, her hand resting on the shoulder of a tall man with hollow cheeks. Hannah didn't know the man. On the back of the photo, written in shaky cursive, were 3 words. He heard it. The first night came quickly. Rain lashed against the roof, the trees outside swaying with violent gusts. Hannah sat near the fireplace, her phone dead, her only light coming from the lantern on the table. The journal lay open in front of her. The entries grew darker with each page. It whispers to me now, not just at night. He went into the lake and never came back. If you ever return, do not answer it. Promise me. Her grandmother had never spoken of who he was. Perhaps the man in the photo, perhaps someone else entirely. Then Hannah heard it. At first, it was buried in the storm, a faint murmur beneath the howl of wind and the tap of rain. She froze, holding her breath. It came again, faint, melodic, like a song heard underwater. The words were muffled, impossible to make out, but the tone was low, coaxing, almost gentle. She pressed her palms to her ears, shaking her head. It's the storm, just the storm. But when she looked at the window, at the black lake just visible through the trees, her stomach turned, because the surface wasn't still anymore. Ripples moved across it, slow and deliberate, as though something beneath had brushed against the surface. She blinked hard, her heart hammering, and for a moment swore she saw a shape, a pale arm, fingers reaching out of the water before sliding back under with barely a splash. The whisper song stopped. The storm raged on, but the silence inside the cabin pressed heavier on her than the thunder outside. She grabbed the journal, clutching it to her chest, and backed away from the window. Don't listen when it calls. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it brought dreams of drowning. She saw herself sinking into the black water, arms pulling her down, dozens of pale faces rising from the depths to greet her. Their mouths moved in unison, forming words she couldn't hear until one face, her grandmother's, appeared, screaming silently as hands dragged Hannah deeper. She woke gasping, sweat chilling her skin. The lantern had gone out, only the faint glow of moonlight lit the room, and somewhere, far off but growing closer, came the sound again, a hum, a call. This time she heard her name in it, Hannah. She stumbled to the window. The lake shone silver under the moonlight, but she wasn't looking at the water. She was looking at the shoreline. Something stood there. It was tall, impossibly thin, its body more shadow than flesh, with eyes like hollow lanterns glowing faintly. It swayed, head cocked, as though listening to something only it could hear. When Hannah blinked, it was gone, and only the lake remained. The journal slipped from her hands. She dropped to her knees, clutching the photograph of her grandmother, the words he heard it, burning in her mind. Her grandmother hadn't been warning her about the lake. She had been warning her about what lived beneath it, and now it knew Hannah was here. Hannah couldn't sleep after that. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark cabin, her grandmother's journal clutched tightly in her lap, listening to the storm fade into silence, the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful but suffocating, pressing in from every wall. Every creak of the cabin, every sigh of wind through the broken shingles, felt like something creeping closer. She tried to convince herself that what she'd seen, the tall, thin figure by the shoreline, was a trick of the moonlight. Shadows could play strange games in the dark, but deep down she knew it wasn't her imagination, the way it tilted its head, the way her name had slipped through the storm almost inside her head. It wasn't natural. At dawn the storm had broken, leaving the lake disturbingly calm again. Hannah stepped outside, the wet ground squelching under her boots. The air was heavy, carrying that same metallic tang mixed with rot. She glanced toward the lake and froze. There were footprints, in the mud by the shore, leading from the water's edge toward the trees. Long, thin prints that didn't match anything human, each step pressed deep into the earth, as though whatever walked there carried impossible weight. She followed them a few steps into the woods, her breath shallow, until they stopped abruptly in the middle of nowhere. The ground there was untouched, as if the figure had simply vanished into the air. Shaking, she returned to the cabin and opened the journal again. She read until her eyes burned, flipping past frantic entries written in her grandmother's jagged handwriting. It waits beneath the surface. It knows who listens. He followed the song. He went in willingly. I couldn't stop him. It's not the water that kills. It's what wears your face when you're gone. Hannah's stomach dropped. Her grandmother wasn't just describing voices. She was describing something worse. Something that lured people in, took them, and replaced them. She remembered the photograph of her grandmother with the man whose name was never mentioned. He heard it, and he never came back. By evening, Hannah decided to explore the cabin's basement. A trapdoor lay beneath a ragged rug in the kitchen. It groaned as she pulled it open, the smell of damp earth rushing up. With a flashlight in hand, she descended the narrow stairs into the dark. The basement wasn't large, just dirt walls and a low ceiling, but in one corner stood a chest. Dust caked its surface, and when she opened it, she nearly dropped the flashlight. Inside were dozens of photographs, all of different people, all taken by the lake. Some were faded, nearly erased by time, but one thing tied them together. Every single person had blank, blackened eyes. Not scratched out, not damaged, as though something in the photograph itself had devoured them. Her grandmother was in several of them, always younger, always standing near the water with strangers Hannah didn't recognize. In one, her grandmother wasn't alone. That tall, thin figure was behind her, half, hidden by the trees. Hannah slammed the chest shut, her hands shaking. She backed up, whispering, "No, no, no." That's when she heard it again. The song, but this time it wasn't outside, it was behind her. She spun, flashlight shaking wildly across the dirt walls. Nothing, no one, but the song grew louder, threading through her skull, weaving into her thoughts. It wasn't words yet, but she felt the pull, the urge to follow it, to step closer to the sound. She clutched the journal against her chest, whispering aloud, "I won't listen, I won't." The song cut off instantly. The silence was worse. Her flashlight flickered, and in that stutter of light, for just a fraction of a second, she saw her grandmother, standing at the bottom of the stairs, eyes black and hollow, mouth open in a silent scream. Hannah stumbled backward into the wall, and the light went out. When it came back, the figure was gone. She didn't sleep at all that night. She sat at the kitchen table, lantern lit, the journal and photos spread in front of her. Outside, the lake shimmered in the moonlight, waiting. Around midnight, there was a knock at the door. Her body froze. She hadn't seen another person for miles, hadn't heard a car, hadn't even seen lights in the forest. Slowly she stood, her heart pounding in her throat. The knock came again, softer this time. She reached for the doorknob with trembling fingers, then stopped. From outside came a voice. "Han, it's me, it's Mom." Hannah's blood ran cold. Her mother had died 3 years ago. The voice continued, gentle, pleading. "Open the door, sweetheart. I just want to see you. Don't you miss me?" Tears stung her eyes. It sounded like her, exactly like her. But her grandmother's words echoed louder. "It's not the water that kills. It's what wears your face when you're gone." Hannah backed away from the door. The voice grew harsher, the words scraping at her skull. "Open the door, Hannah." The entire cabin shook as something slammed against the wood. Once, twice, again, then silence. She sank to the floor, sobbing, clutching her ears. She didn't move until the lantern's flame flickered out and dawn's gray light crept into the cabin. The next day she knew she couldn't just sit and wait. She had to find answers. She followed the shoreline, the black water reflecting her every step. At one end of the lake, half hidden by reeds, she found ruins, stone foundations of what once had been a boathouse. Inside the rubble she discovered carvings on the walls, old and deep, symbols she didn't recognize, circles within circles, eyes carved over and over again, and beneath them words etched in desperate strokes. "The lake doesn't forget." She stumbled back, her stomach turning. Then from the water came ripples. Something rose, not fully, not yet. Just the suggestion of a face beneath the surface eyes too wide, mouth stretched into a grin far too large for a human skull. It lingered there, just beneath the surface, watching her. Hannah screamed and ran, crashing through the woods until she burst back into the cabin. She slammed the door shut, bolted it, her chest heaving. That night the voices came again, not one this time. Dozens, male, female, young, old. All of them whispering her name, begging her to come outside, to come to the water. Some cried, some laughed, some sang. She pressed her hands against her ears, rocking on the floor, whispering over and over, "Don't listen, don't listen, don't listen." And then she heard one voice that froze her blood completely, her own. From outside the window, her own voice whispered, "Please let me in." The shadows lengthened across the walls. Her reflection in the window didn't move when she did. It just smiled, and then it whispered back, "You already belong to us." The night in Hollow Creek was heavy, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Marcus, Elena, and Jonah stood outside the rotting church, its broken steeple clawing at the sky. The air was colder than it had been moments ago, the kind of cold that seeped into the bones, whispering that something ancient was awake. They had come too far to turn back. Inside, the church smelled of mold and burned wood. The floor groaned under their feet as if warning them to leave. A single candle flickered on the altar, though none of them had lit it. Jonah gripped his flashlight tighter, his knuckles white. "Why is there light here?" Elena whispered. Marcus didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the back wall where words had been carved deep into the wood. "We are not gone. We wait." Elena's breath caught this. This wasn't here before. Jonah shook his head. "We shouldn't be here. We need to get out now." But Marcus stepped forward. His instincts screamed danger, yet a strange pull dragged him closer to the altar. Something beneath the floorboards hummed low and steady, almost like a heartbeat. He knelt and pressed his palm against the wood. It vibrated under his skin. "Elena," Marcus said slowly, "whatever we're looking for, it's under us." Before anyone could stop him, he drove the crowbar into the floor, prying up rotted planks. The smell that burst out was unbearable. Rot blood and damp earth. The three coughed, covering their faces, but Marcus kept pulling, and then they saw it, a staircase, narrow, leading straight into blackness. Elena froze. No, absolutely not. But Marcus's eyes were wild now. This is it. This is what the village has been hiding. They descended one step at a time. The deeper they went, the more suffocating the air became, as if oxygen itself didn't want to exist here. The walls dripped with moisture, covered in carvings of faces twisted in silent screams. Jonah's flashlight flickered, and he cursed under his breath. Finally, the staircase ended in a vast underground chamber. What they saw made their hearts stutter. Dozens of bodies, or what was left of them. They weren't buried. They weren't even laid to rest. They hung suspended by rusted chains from the ceiling, their skin mummified, their jaws stretched open in silent agony. Some looked centuries old, others frighteningly recent. Elena gagged, her hand clamped over her mouth. Dear God! Marcus stepped forward, his light catching something in the center of the room, a massive stone slab, its surface etched with symbols none of them recognized. And on it a single book bound in what looked disturbingly like flesh. The instant Marcus touched the stone, every body hanging from the chains shifted, not much, just enough to creak, but it was enough to make Elena scream. They're moving, Marcus, they're moving. The chains rattled, the corpses swayed. One by one, their heads turned toward the intruders. Jonah's voice cracked. We need to run, now. But Marcus's hands were already on the book. He lifted it, and the chamber roared to life. A sound filled the air, not human, not animal, but something vast and ancient. The walls trembled, dust raining down from above. The corpses began to whisper. Not in English, not in any language Elena recognized, but the meaning cut straight into their minds. Stay, join us. The village is never empty. Elena grabbed Marcus's arm, trying to rip the book from his hands. Put it back, but Marcus was transfixed. His eyes glowed faintly, as though the symbols from the slab had imprinted themselves inside him. His lips moved, speaking words not his own. Jonah shook him violently. Marcus, stop! You don't know what you're saying. The corpses lurched. Chains snapped. One fell to the ground, dragging itself across the dirt with broken fingers. Another dropped, bones cracking on impact, yet it kept crawling. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly blue in the dark. Marcus, Elena screamed again. We have to leave. Finally, as if waking from a trance, Marcus dropped the book. The whispers silenced instantly. The corpses froze, their heads snapping back upward. And then laughter, it echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the stone walls, high, pitched, shrill, and utterly wrong. The book slid across the slab on its own, pages fluttering open. Symbols burned into the air, glowing crimson. Jonah fired a shot from his pistol at the book, but the bullet dissolved midair as though swallowed by the shadows. The laughter grew louder. The corpses began chanting now, a deep, unholy resonance shaking the chamber. The chains rattled like 1,000 iron bells. Marcus grabbed both Elena and Jonah, yanking them toward the staircase. Run. They scrambled up, slipping on the whetstone. Behind them, chains snapped one after another as the corpses tore themselves free. Something massive stirred below, a shape too big to comprehend, rising from the shadows beneath the slab. By the time they burst out of the church, the ground shook violently. The steeple cracked and fell, smashing into the graveyard. Marcus slammed the church doors shut, shoving a broken beam across the handles, but the sound inside didn't stop. The chanting continued, louder. Jonah collapsed against a tree, his chest heaving. What the hell was that? What did you wake up down there? Marcus's hands shook as he stared at the church. His voice was hollow. It wasn't asleep. It was waiting. Elena's tears streamed silently down her face. We should have left this place alone. From the cracks in the church windows, a faint red glow seeped out, pulsing like a heartbeat. And then, in the stillness of the forest, a whisper drifted through the night, low, calm, and close, though no one was there. The village is never forgotten. The village remembers you now. The three of them turned in unison toward the sound, but the forest was empty. Yet Marcus knew, deep in his gut, that they hadn't escaped. They had been marked, and Hollow Creek would never let them leave.